Hello, I'm Steve Hassan, and I'm delighted to have with me Ed Coffman. Ed and I recently connected, and Ed was involved with the same group that I was, the Moonies, Unification Movement, any number of hundreds of other groups. And I heard you, Ed, on a podcast called The Farm. You were using a different name for that. I think Don Diligent.
Yeah, correct.
But I was very impressed with the amount of research you had done on the early origins of the Moonies. And I just thought it would be fascinating to connect with someone who shared the same cult experience, but took you longer to wake up and get out because you didn't have a car crash and someone to intervene. So why don't you share a little bit, what year did you first meet them, and like give us a little short summary of your time in the cult.
Sure. So I was living in Santa Barbara, California. I got there at the end of 77, moved in with my dad, and I was planning on going to the city college there. And the previous years, I don't want to say that I was a true searcher of spiritual things, but I did have a relationship with my younger brother that one thing led to another through discussions with him, where I came to the conclusion that we were definitely living in a time when we should be expecting the second coming, meaning second coming of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I had made a determination on January 1st of 1978, living there with my dad, as I said, going to city college, that when I started to attend classes, that I would take classes that would help me understand the nature of man better, so that hopefully when Jesus came back, I could recognize him and be a disciple to him. And the classes that I took, therefore, were psychology, philosophy, sociology, and that was the setting. Then by February of that year, I was doing some errands, going down to one of these stores in Santa Barbara, and I come to this street corner, and my eyes meet with this lady. And
Oh, woman again, huh? Me too.
yeah, a woman. Right.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yes. It was only one woman, though, in my case. Yes.
Yeah, I had three.
Yeah. Right.
I got tag teamed.
Yeah, indeed.
Anyway, I know you have a huge amount to share, so I want to compress the recruitment
Sure.
story.
Sure. So basically, she said, do I know you? I said, I didn't, but I'd like to. I was intrigued by her European accent because I had known about, I had lived in England for a year and traveled through Europe. One thing led to another. And I told her about what I was searching for in life. And then she said that she was doing missionary work, which then fascinated me. I get a little introductory not workshop, but a little introductory lecture before the workshop at a motel that she and two other recruiters were staying at. I was intrigued by the contents. Next thing you know, I'm breaking off a date. That day, Friday, I go up to the indoctrination retreat called Camp Mazumdar in Southern California, listen to the 2-day workshop. I'm intrigued more. I was a little concerned at the end of the workshop that maybe this was too early, because I thought I needed to have this education and learning all these things, preparing myself. I had in my mind 1984 was probably going to be the year that the second coming was happening. So through a little push from what's called the mother figure, that you would know quite well, the term, for that church there. She encouraged me to stay for a 7-day workshop, and that if I sincerely prayed for a dream to confirm that what I'm doing is the right thing, that I should get a dream.
Yeah.
Sure enough, that's exactly what happened on the third night. And by the time the 7-day workshop is over, I'm learning about the live course of Sun Myung Moon. And then at the end of that 7-day, you basically have to make a decision. How do you feel about this content? And basically, because of the dream, I thought that that was already a premonition of sorts that I was going to accept whatever the conclusion was for this 7-day material.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't hard for me just to say, yes, I believe Sun Myung Moon is the second coming. And then I moved in after the 21-day workshop was over. You had a 7-day period of witnessing, a 7-day period of fundraising that constituted the 21 days. And then you signed paperwork. So I officially became a member on March 12th, 1978. And the rest is history, as they say.
So it's interesting to hear your story, because I was recruited in February of 74 and they refused to say who the Messiah was. And I didn't find out for months who the Messiah was. So it was a very different tale. But let's move forward. So give us a 5-minute summary of what you did for 36 years.
Well, basically, that little period that I was in Los Angeles, that was a 6-month period where it was divided pretty much between fundraising and witnessing. And I showed more talent with fundraising. So by the time the 6 months came around, there was a call for MFT, as it was called.
Yeah, MFT, Mobile Fundraising Team.
Correct.
Fundraising.
National in this context.
Yeah, and I was more successful recruiting, so that's what they kept me doing, and I did a minimal amount of fundraising until the end, when I fell asleep at the wheel of the fundraising van that I was captain of.
Exactly. Yeah. So then I volunteered, and then I went to another 7-day re-indoctrination workshop. The way that I look at it now in hindsight was that was a workshop to prepare you for a slightly more intense, we'll call it, way of living that was going to be present on National MFT. So, which is exactly what I entered into once I got to my first region. And started fundraising.
And for our listeners, that involves like being dropped off and having flowers or candies or candles or other things going up saying you're raising money for Christian youth programs or other deceptive things. And people would make hundreds of dollars a day, turn it all over. People wouldn't keep anything because that would be satanic. You know, be bad indemnity for your soul. And people worked like really long hours, 12 hours a day, sometimes in awful weather. And I just want to say one more thing and then back to you, Ed. When I was sent out of New York in end of 75, I was sent on MFT because it turned out I was asking questions they didn't want to answer, and I didn't realize that that's the reason. They said that my parents were trying to kidnap me, so that was the excuse. But basically, they sent me to an MFT training, and I hung out with folks on MFT, and I remember thinking, these people are like robots. I was totally a robot, but in my mind, as a totally programmed robot, I thought they were really robotic because like all they thought about was making money.
That would be a fact.
Yeah, it just was what it was.
Yeah, and I was on MFT, OWP for our listeners, OWP would be a business-oriented MFT where you're selling products that are not like nickel dime products. When I say nickel dime, I'm talking about $2, $3, $5. In this case, you would have products that would be like $20, $30, and
So venariums and pictures and
correct,
more extensive
correct,
things.
right.
Yeah.
So for 8 years, between 1978 and 1986, fall of 86, so that 8-year period was divided between what we'll call the hardcore MFT, where you're representing the Unification Church proper, technically speaking, even having a badge at your disposal, sometimes even having to wear it on your shirt saying that you are Unification Church. That would depend on the town or the situation. From a PR standpoint, mostly we tried not to wear them for obvious reasons.
Right.
So that pretty much was my life for 8 years, just making money. I mean, nothing else.
I am so in awe that you were able to put up with that for 8 years, man.
Is it called awe? Yeah. Okay.
It's hard. It's a hard life. You were
It is a hard
you were
life.
labor trafficked, my friend, by the strictest definition of fraud, force, and coercion. You have a lawsuit on labor trafficking going possible there.
Yeah, that's a very intriguing thing that you're bringing up there. Obviously, this is a term that's only becoming more commonly known in recent years. We would have never thought of such a thing back in those days.
Yeah, I didn't think of it until the last few years when I learned about labor trafficking, and I was like, oh, I was a labor trafficking victim. I worked 18 to 21 hours a day, 7 days a week for no pay. Aha. And the leaders were multimillionaire, billionaires.
Right.
Aha. Buying real estate with the money I was making for them.
Right. And on National MFT, these regions were big enough where you were crossing state lines, which furthers the point.
Yep.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. So I became a captain within a very short time. I was actually the top brother fundraiser in my region. The sisters were kicking my proverbial behind, but as usually is the case, but for obvious reasons there too. So I then became a captain within a year and a half, not even a year and a half, I don't think. And I maintained a captain status for a solid 5-year period. And
needless to say, you were not wearing a beard as a Moonie.
I was not. No, that would not have been considered.
Not allowed.
No beards allowed.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I was even a commander for a year, as far as that goes.
A regional commander.
Yes. And, for our listeners that won't necessarily be able to get the nuance behind it, but my 8 years then fell under a similar type of training system as your 2 years, because we were both under the same, what I'll call master leader, Mr. Takura Kamiyama.
Yes, I was one of Kamiyama's 12 American disciples when he was first brought to the U.S.
That's right. And this is a little bit of a side note, but I strongly believe that what the Japanese brought to the Unification Church in the United States in the early 70s, I feel that was when the true cultish aspects of how people would get recruited and be cultivated, eventually then becoming full-time live-in members. Before the Japanese came and the system that they had learned and created themselves over the course of time throughout the 60s, when their organization or aspect of the Unification Church was growing at a fairly rapid pace. By the time the early 70s came along, they had a system that was just, they knew how to cross all the T's, dot all the I's, and what it meant to be able to get somebody. So
Oh, yeah.
they bring that to the States, and you're the byproduct, as myself, of that type of training.
No, I was literally in meetings as Kamiyama's disciple, where Moon was talking about how pathetic the American leadership was. He wanted to move the headquarters from DC to New York so they could have more control over the members. They installed Japanese mother figures in every center to be spies and to make sure everything was being reported back. And people like Alan Tate Wood, who was a leader, left because people like me were being groomed to be fascists, his words.
Right.
I say in my interviews, I would have died on command or killed on command. That's how thoroughly I was indoctrinated. It was intense.
Right. So I think that covers, the 8-year period quite well. I mean, we could go into a lot of nuanced stuff in terms of the loaded language, which you and I both know, all the key phrases and key terms that were used, but most everyone is pretty much aware of those things. So
Can I just ask you a question, Ed? So
sure.
what did you hear of me when you were a member? Did you ever hear my name?
No, I was the most naive person to meet my recruiter that you could have possibly imagined.
Uh-huh.
If I would have gone to a newspaper stand that week that I joined, and saw that there was a congressional investigation that was coming to a close in the Unification Church, this, that, and the other. I had no clue of what the Unification Church was. I'd never heard of the
Got it.
term, nothing. Just
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, were you married in the cult?
I was, and basically, it's this topic that we're on now, which I would say would be the beginning of a cognitive dissonance process for me that brought me to eventually breaking with the organization, all told.
Uh-huh.
Because, as I guess a lot of the listeners know, Reverend Moon chooses your spouse, and you, most of the time, 99% of the time, you've never even seen this person. Oftentimes, you don't even speak the same language as this person, and you're supposed to create an ideal family with that person.
Yeah, and I need to just add for our listeners who are maybe too young to know about, but there would be mass weddings, like Moon did 30,000 couples at one time, where he would line up the men and the women, go, you and you, you and you, you and you, and you had 5 minutes to decide if you accepted God's choice for you. And as you say, 99% of everyone went, yes, Father, whatever you say, Father.
If you didn't have that attitude, you were considered not to have enough faith.
Right.
Plain and simple.
Right.
It's tricky because they say you're supposed to discuss, you sit down in front of each other, take 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I can't remember the exact amount of time now. But the fact of the matter is that the pressure was just so ingrained into the entire scenario that you're in, that sitting down in front of the other person was just a formality.
Right. Because part of the indoctrination is you can't go to heaven alone. You need a partner, because God is male and female, and you need to have sinless children, because that's how the world is going to be purified from Satan's blood, etc.
Right. So, to give our listeners just a perception here of how, incompatible this type of arranged marriage can be. My first match, wonderful lady, nothing to say about her in a negative light in terms of who she is as a person. But here, this was a person that had all sorts of emotional problems. She had abuse growing up, sexual abuse. And by the time she joined the church, she was a mess in terms of all of this baggage that she was bringing into the church.
Was she American or Japanese or Korean or what?
She was American. She was American.
Okay.
And when I got matched to her, she was such a difficult person for me to relate to, because here I am, I'm this captain, I'm like having this so-called high standard. That's part of the loaded language for our viewers.
Yep.
Having a high standard is one of these terms.
Right.
And here I have this sister, because we were called brothers and sisters, where it got so bad she was actually asked to leave the center to go home to be called what's a B member. There's another one of those terms.
Yep.
The jargon, right?
Yep.
Being a
B member is an associate member, not able to contribute, and was a distraction of energy, time, and money. So we send people home who were
correct.
You could contribute money, you could come to an occasional service, but have a good life.
Yeah, something of that nature. But here I am, I'm supposed to be creating an ideal family. Not only that, I'm this captain that's looked up to in my national MFT region. So this created quite a situation that had to be dealt with. And just fast forwarding here, because of lack of time, I actually got permission to break my blessing officially. I was told that Mr. Kamiyama, getting back to him, was going to talk directly to Moon, and that because this sister wasn't good enough, just using that as a phrase, to be blessed with me, that the blessing should be broken, and that someone else should be found for me.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened. I mean, if you were to ask me, did Moon ever find out about my relationship? I don't think there's a chance in all get out that it was ever addressed.
Yep.
But that's what I was told.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and people, you're so programmed to think that he can read your mind and know all of your spiritual ancestors, and this is the perfect person that God has chosen for you. And then you find out you got a dud, basically. You got somebody who's incompatible as a partner. Right.
And incompatible, I think, is the operative word here, because nobody is a bad person.
Right.
In of themselves.
Right.
But to be compatible in marriage, that's just a whole different ballgame.
Of course.
And here we have, just fast forwarding to the present, we have the Unification Church now. Okay, it's the year 2021. They talk so much about the value of the marriage relationship. It's not even called the Unification Movement anymore. They call it the Blessing Movement. So the blessing means marriage, of course.
Yeah, that's the loaded term that the Moonies use.
Correct. But of course, no one wants to discuss what the marriages were like back in the heyday when things were done in a certain way back then. Because the casualty rate of a lot of these couples that either got matched in 1975, that was the first main one where a good number of American members were able to get their future spouses in that blessing. And then, of course, I was the one that everyone kind of knows of in terms of the media, meaning the Madison Square Garden blessing of 1982. But so many casualties because of incompatibility.
Yep.
And that's when I started wondering, well, how did this happen? Because as you well know, the onus is always on you. You're not enough.
Yep. Group's perfect. Moon's perfect. It's your fault. By the way, I think I protested outside of Madison Square Garden in '82.
Really?
I had placards and everything.
Okay. So anyway, fast forwarding here, then I got another wife for me in 1989. And even though I'm technically still married to this woman, but once again, a totally incompatible situation. I'll try and abbreviate this. So I go to Korea. They have the similar type of situation as you already described, where you line up all the men on the one side, women on the other side in this big ballroom setting. And I quickly get matched to this sister. I find out that she's the national leader of Panama. And I was already told ahead of time that the standard, once again, using that term, Moon said this, that's what the standard, Moon said that. So that Moon said, or father said, as a faithful member would say, anyway, that anyone who got matched to somebody who was a national leader, if the national leader was a woman, was a sister, then that brother would have to go to that country. So think of this. I don't speak a word of Spanish. I have to try and establish an ideal family in a country I don't know this woman from Eve, okay? And then I have to inherit the mission of being the national leader. You talk about a recipe for disaster. That's exactly what happened. So the course of our relationship, it's been, escaping from each other, reuniting, escaping from each other, reuniting. And this is not an uncommon story amongst unification church marriages.
Yep.
It's a tragic thing. So one of the biggest lies, if there's anything I want anybody to remember from our talk today, this whole idea that the unification church is building an ideal world through ideal families, that's got to be the biggest misnomer, the biggest lie of about anything that there is within the unification church, because that hits me on such a personal level. And I don't know if you want to chime in.
Yeah, I do. I so much want to get into the early days and the Asian Anti-Communist League research you did and what's going on. But Moon himself was a bigamist, was married over and over, was sleeping with followers, just horrible. It was like the opposite of any role model. We had this fantasy that was put in our heads of the most perfect man, 10 times greater than Jesus or Moses or Buddha. And when I read Hyojin Wife's book, In the Shadow of the Moons, and she talked about confronting Sun Myung Moon, why did you have sex with all these other women? He's like, it's providential. I had to do it. I had to fornicate with all these other women to purify them. Right.
Yeah, the term she used in full was providential affairs.
Yeah, providential affairs. It's and of course he had a child out of wedlock that Bohi Pak raised, and the son Sammy didn't even know about it.
Right.
But thank goodness you got free. And so I'm really interested to hear, and you've just recently read Combating Cult Mind Control and Freedom of Mind and Cult of Trump. I'm really interested to know your reflections. Having left the group, you were engaged in deep research and the early history of the group. Say a little bit more about where you're at, what you came to learn.
In reading your books and addressing, of course, the core of what you bring through your books, which is the bite model. For me, the bite model affects my way of thinking in terms of reflecting on my experience more from the eye of the bite, because I was as you say, a believer type. So I was all ready to go. I mean, I was the perfect guy to pick up on the street that
Yep.
day. I was looking for the second coming. All I needed was to hear the right information, and
The
I
right
was going to be
lies, you mean?
well. Yes, exactly. The right lies in this context.
Or the
Correct.
seducing lies may be a better way of phrasing it.
Yes. So the way that the divine principle was taught in a 2-day workshop format, I mean, I was eating this stuff up like it was the best thing since sliced bread.
Hmm.
I wasn't questioning anything. I wasn't in a state of mind where, okay, am I going to go now back to my hometown and I'm going to now study the parallels of history and like vet this information?
Right.
Because for those who know you, you started lecturing and you started seeing the flaws and the parallels of history, and then the next thing you know, you're fundraising and you're not lecturing.
Well, I found that out because I had a small expense account and I went and bought a history textbook thinking I would beef up my lecture and make it more effective. And then I realized the numbers didn't add up according to the history textbooks. And I was like,
Right.
what's up with this?
Right. So, you know where I really feel betrayed in thinking about my whole life in the Unification Church is that I was told that Sun Myung Moon lived this type of life, that he did this from the time he was born until 1935, 36. You know, he supposedly meets Jesus, and then he has another period where he has to do this until 1945, and so forth and so on, that there is this very concrete life, as it's called, father's life course,
Yep.
as it was phrased. Okay. And I want to say that in thinking about other ex-Moonies, that either I've read the material online or some ex-Moonies that I actually have a relationship with where I can talk on the phone, that a lot of ex-Moonies, they don't want to wrap their brains around the fact that this is a big lie. This is not just a bunch of small lies.
Right.
This is what Hitler wrote about in Mein Kampf, okay, where the tendency is that a person is never going to think that someone would have the audacity of telling you something that is absolutely false everywhere you look.
Right.
That you would never think that another human being would do that to you.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second and tell you one thing that was done on me, and I did it to others in the lecture, especially with the history parallels. I'd repeat what they did to me. They'd say, and you can go to the library and you can open the history textbooks and you can prove that this is true. And then until I went and checked it out, and then it was like, oh my God. But it was just that kind of behavioral repetition, this kind of, you were matched with an older brother, women with older sisters, and you wanted to be like them, and you prayed all the time that God would work through your central figure, and
Right.
that would lift your spirit and save all your ancestors from both generations, 10 generations in the spirit world.
Right. So, the reason why I want to talk about the big lie is because it not only it allows people here that are listening to this to understand my process for leaving, but then what I ended up doing once I left. Because you found out about me basically because of the body of work that I've actually already put out there on the internet through a podcasting arrangement.
Called The Farm, I believe.
Right, it's called The Farm, right. And once I came to the conclusion, well, wait a minute. If he's not the Messiah, okay, then is any of it true? in other words, then you have to question, did he actually, as a 16-year-old, did he actually meet Jesus? Okay. Yeah, I know.
Sorry, nope.
Well, thank you. But then the
But
question.
he was in another cult where he learned a lot of the divine principle.
Well, and that kind of gets to my next point, because if you have to toss everything out, and if you're a person that really wants to know the truth, I mean, I've already stated that I joined the Unification Church because I was looking for the truth. Okay. Well, I wanted to find out, well, who is this man from the beginning?
Yep.
And that began my journey. So I started looking at all the information that was on how well do you know your moon. I started looking at all the information on what is on the moon. The first book that I read was Nansuk's book. And then one thing led to another. And then I started to examine, based upon the body of knowledge that's out on the internet now, what could be the plausible explanation for what is his life in reality at that age, at this stage, and so forth.
Yep.
And then I eventually came to the conclusion the man was never religious at all. That he took up this Messiah role as an actor. So I know this is going to sound a bit odd, but in terms of getting the Academy Award for best role as a Messiah, he's done a pretty darn good job. I mean, in terms of being able to come across in a way that can actually convince people. And that is also the reason why I am deeply betrayed, because, oh my gosh, just none of it's true, as I was saying before. So then eventually I started seeing these types of connections politically here, these types of connections politically there, connections with the military, connections with the CIA here, the KCIA, meaning Korean Central Intelligence Agency. Yep. And then one thing led to another, and I actually believe now, and this is in the podcast material that I put out there, that the Unification Church, established in 1954, it wasn't established as a religious organization. It was, to my thinking, based upon all of my research, I truly believe that it was a pseudo-religious, or maybe more appropriately put, a socio-political organization with a religious facade.
Exactly.
And that's exactly how it started.
Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah.
We see these signs.
That's what I came to when I read the entire House subcommittee investigation, and I read the founder of the Korean CIA's testimony under oath that he organized and utilized the Unification Church for use as a political tool, and just learned. I was like, oh, this was a psyop. Oh, this was to counter North Korean brainwashing, to brainwash South Koreans, but use a front group with a pseudo-religious facade as a cover. So it wouldn't look like this Korean government or the American intelligence people. So we both arrived at the same conclusion, it sounds like.
Yes. And there are, of course, a lot of little nuanced information that I could talk about, but because of the lack of time, obviously, it's probably not
we'll have to do another one, Ed, but
right. So
but let's bring it back to us today with Sean Moon and the January 6th insurrection and Hak Jahan's peace, meeting with Gingrich and Pompeo and Pence, and Like
Well,
what's the take on what's going on now with Trump?
yeah, I mean, this is also very personal for me because my wife, I don't know if I said this to you privately, but she follows Sean and Justin Moon, with Sanctuary Church.
No, you didn't mention that. I'm
I didn't
sorry to
mention.
hear that.
Well, it is what it is, and we have an 18-year-old son where she is trying to influence our 18-year-old. Of course, she became a follower of Sean. I would say maybe 4 years ago.
Hmm.
So from the age of uh, junior high, my son is being influenced
I'm
by
so
by this
sorry.
by this material, but um, he knows where his father stands as far as this goes. So he's getting two different outlooks coming from both of his parents, which obviously is a fortunate thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Those kids that are getting bombarded by their parents, both parents, that this is the way, this is the future. That's a tough pill for a lot of these kids to be able to deal with.
Yeah, and just to be explicit for our listeners, Sean has been in the media with his crown of bullets, golden bullets, and his rod of iron ministry, which he says the Bible was talking about assault rifles, right? The Bible was talking about assault rifles. Huh? Maybe slingshots back then, or spears, swords, maybe arrows.
Yeah,
No, AR-15s or whatever.
right.
Anyway, and he was at the January 6th insurrection, tweeting out disinformation that it was Antifa, and the Mooney newspaper, Washington Times, was saying the disinformation too about what was happening during the failed insurrection attempt.
Right. Yeah, it's a very dangerous situation, as you well know, with the fact that Sean now has decided, or has already purchased property down in Texas, and
Near Waco,
near Waco.
where David Koresh and all of the white supremacist sovereign citizens use as a big motivational tool by the overreach of the FBI and the ATF.
Right.
It was quite
And
deliberate, I'm sure.
I would think so. And my understanding is that he plans on purchasing property, if he hasn't already purchased it already, in 5 other strategic locations throughout the United States that would be able to cater to this private militia patriot movement that we're addressing here.
Yep.
And this patriot movement has been around.
Patriot with quotes, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes,
Please.
with quotes. Yes, for those who wouldn't know. Yes.
People who are indoctrinated to believe the big lie that Trump won the election and it was stolen, yada, yada, yada. And we need a violent overthrow of the current government.
That's right. And if things pan out the way that the way it looks like it's going to, the fact that he's got, meaning Sean and his brother Justin, have this property, that, well, what are you going to do with that property? Their organization in of themselves is quite small. They don't have that many people to take advantage of a property of that size, which then suggests, the logic dictates here, that means that they're putting out a call to these other patriot movements, quotes on the patriot once again, that, hey, we got this spread of land down here. You guys can do your training exercises right down here where we are.
Yep.
Which means that Sean and Justin are now positioning themselves to enable this entire movement, however we want to call it, in terms of bringing more instability, a more insurrectionist mentality to certain aspects of Christianity, air quotes on this type of Christianity
Yep.
as well. And, it scares the living daylights out of me.
No, the focus is going back to the way it was when I was in on anti-communism. Russia and China were Satan's army on earth, and that's the black and white all or nothing frame that they're pushing now. That is going to be more attractive to people in America than the moon is the Messiah, and he says that Jesus failed his mission and should never have gone to the cross, and he's the perfect man story. And they're recruiting vets, people who are trained at using weapons and who maybe are, depressed, anxious, wondering what the hell's going on with our country. And they're creating this false narrative about how they're going to create this idyllic, country and world again. That was the fantasy that propelled me in the cult, was we were going to build a Garden of Eden on earth. Everyone would be at peace. Everyone would be at harmony. Yeah.
The kingdom of heaven on earth, that phrase in itself is mentioned dozens of times within the divine principle.
Yep.
That's the core of it. So Sean is interpreting that now in his own way, as we're expressing.
And he calls himself the king. But my understanding is that he and Justin, who owns Car Arms, and they have a gun factory, I should add, that they're not aligned with Hak Jahan, the moon's wife, who's now running another part of the movement. Is that correct?
Right. Well, that's right. And, this is, I think, a good moment for me to mention about the far right. Some people have called it the radical religious right, dominionism, reconstructionism. That what's happening here is we have some very powerful people in government that have aligned themselves with something that is called Christianity, but as you and I both know, has nothing to do with Jesus's heart, or however you want to phrase that.
Right. I wrote about it in The Cult of Trump, that basically they think they have to take over governments, take over, culture and science, and end the separation of church and state, and create a theocracy to run the world for God. Yeah. Except it's humans that are claiming to be.
That's right. And it's interesting that, when you and I joined in the heyday of the Moonies, we were told that we were going to be able to gather all of these Christians, and they were going to end up believing what we believed, that there was going to be this united religion, centered upon our divine principle, and that was going to lead towards the kingdom of heaven being able to get other religions then to come in with a so-called united Christianity centered upon Moon and his people. But it's just the opposite. Once again, it's the big lie. When I look at the history of the organization, and this comes out in my podcast material, that it has been just the opposite. It has been the far right, radical right people going back into the 50s that have been cultivating the unification church.
Yep.
Not the other way around.
Exactly.
And this is a story that needs to be told. It's a story that I've tried to tell through my podcast material, and I still study it. There's still a lot of unanswered questions. Many details that I'm in search of. I'm one of these guys that I like to think of myself as a panner of gold. I go through just all of these documents, hundreds, thousands of pages of documents, and then I find a piece of gold here and a piece of gold there. And then if I get enough pieces of gold, and then I can start being able to construct some type of picture with these nuggets, that's where the real satisfaction for me has come in this research that I've done. It's not for the faint-hearted. You have to have a certain character or a certain way about you to be willing to pan for gold, hours at a time.
No, you're a good person and you sincerely believed. And when you woke up, you realized how conned you were. It's a very therapeutic thing to go, okay, what the hell? And what is this? And I want to know what the truth is. And then you go for it. It's very therapeutic.
Yeah, I mean, I've needed it very much.
Yeah.
For me to keep some type of stability in my own post cold healing process. And I've got a long ways to go in terms of where I want to be, in terms of, what still needs to be dealt with from, 36 years of my life, to something that just wasn't what it was supposed to be.
Right. 100%.
So hopefully I still have enough years here in this meat sack that I'm in, to where I can be able to, eventually get someplace decent, before it's time to check out to the next.
No, I think you should write a book. There's a book that needs to get written about what this cult really is about, and like outing all of the Yakuza people and the Class A war, World War II Class A war criminals, Kodama, the neo-Nazis, the libertarians, the dominionists, as you said, the ones that say Jesus lied when he said my kingdom is not of this world. Jesus wants us to take over the government and have lots of money to run things.
Right. But by the way, maybe yeah, exactly. Maybe a good way to end here, because I see we've only got like a couple of minutes left. I'll just state how I got to my breaking point.
Great.
Which is getting back to Sam Pak. So when I came back to the United States in 1998, I had been in Panama for a while. As I said earlier, I got blessed to the national leader in Panama.
You got blessed.
Yes, blessed.
Not.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, using those terms again.
Yeah, you got married.
Arranged marriage.
Right.
Yes. So anyway, a brother I used to work with on MFT, he told me, Ed, you need to know about something that's happened here in the States, because you haven't been here for a while. Let's talk. So I'm going to abbreviate this. Takes me out in the car, tells me about how Nansuk, who wrote the book about the Moon family, once again, Nansuk was married to the eldest son,
Yojin Moon.
Yeah, Yojin.
She was born in the cult too.
Right. And
I knew Yojin when he was a puppy, and he was an arrogant son of a bitch.
Yes. Yes.
As a kid, spoiled brat.
Yeah, that would be the case. So anyway, he told me, Ed, we're not supposed to read this book. But then he said to me one thing that I would probably find out anyway. So he said, you're going to find out about Sam Pak, that one of Bohi Pak, for those who might not know, Bohi Pak was the top disciple / lieutenant of Sun Myung Moon during the 70s and 80s. So he said, you're going to find out that there's this son that was raised in Bohi Pak's family that's actually father Sun Myung Moon's son. And he said to me, don't worry about that, because there's an explanation for this. I said, okay. Well, the explanation is, remember how Moon and the leaders always said that to follow Jacob's course, which is a big part of the divine principle, following Jacob's course, that Jacob had to have 12 sons. And Moon technically was supposed to have 12 sons, but we were told later that it was okay that he had 12 children. And that's what most of the common membership of the Unification Church understood to be the reality. But then Tom said to me, well, I work at East Garden. I have some inside information. Well, the reality is that that father, Sun Myung Moon, actually really does need to follow Jacob's course to the letter. He has to have 12 sons, and Sampak is one of those sons. And I accepted what this brother said to me, and I just kept that knowledge in the back of my head for 16 years until eventually there was an ABC television show where the president of the Unification Church had to address Sam on national TV. And in answering the question about Sam, then he didn't deny, the national leader didn't deny that Sam was not Sun Myung Moon's son. And then he finished his answer by saying, sometimes people can make mistakes.
Well, he was Sun Myung Moon's son. He wasn't Bo Hi Pak's son, you mean?
Correct. But
Right.
what I'm trying to say is that the journalist was trying to catch the national leader of the Unification Church in hopefully a lie or in some type of deception by addressing Sam, and then Michael Balcom didn't want to deal with it directly, but then he ended his answer by saying, well, sometimes people can make mistakes. And I froze in my chair when he said that on national TV. You just said the word mistake as it relates to a question about a potential illegitimate child of the Messiah? There's something wrong with that.
Yeah, the Messiah being the perfect man.
Correct. And that was my breaking point. As soon as I got home, I was traveling at the time. I immediately went to the library, got Nansuk's book, and then the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of American members left with Nansuk. She went on 60 Minutes and talked about Hyojin's coke problem and prostitutes and how he kicked her in the stomach when she was pregnant, and just so many horrible, horrible stories. But there's life after cult.
I like to think so.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And part of the recovery process for me, because that's what I do, professionally, is unpacking all of the indoctrination, all these beliefs, all this loaded language, which we've been listening to, like blessing and
Right.
and father. Like my father, Milton Hassan, was only my physical father, but Moon was my true father. I had to unpack all of that crap and go back to wait, that was a lie. And come back to who I was. Fortunately, I wasn't born in the cult, so I had 19 years of an identity and a family and a religious upbringing to come back to. And I wasn't in it that long. It was only 2.5 years when I almost died in that van crash.
Right.
As we're summing up, like we also chatted when we talked about how there are tens of thousands of ex-Moonies in America, people who've done a 21-day workshop or longer, who are out there. And we'd love to get them speaking up, saying, yep, it happened to me, and
Yes.
There's life after cult.
Yeah. Addressing your point, furthering it, in other words, I really would have loved to have somebody that left during even the 60s here in the United States, the late 60s, early 70s, before the true nature of the cult began to show itself left, right, and center. Because it wasn't until Sun Myung Moon moved to the United States in 1972 that the whole character of the movement shifted into a much higher gear.
Yep.
But a lot of people had their falling out well before that ever happened. And it would be really great. Of course, these people now would be, into their 70s.
Yep.
At this stage of the game. But if there's anybody out there that's still around and you want to tell us about what it was like at the very wee stages of the moon operation here in the United States, boy, I would be all ears.
Yep, it's really interesting. Yeah, it was really when Americans said no to the Vietnam War. This is my take. That and there was protests and everything, that the intelligence operatives and others said, let's bring them to the US onto campuses to counter the communist threat on campuses, because we know we need military force to fight the commies everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing again in the indoctrination. It's the communists.
Yeah, yeah. And that university work, we think of CARP, for those who might not know, Collegiate Association for the Research of Principles. Obviously, Steve, you know that quite well because that's how you joined.
Well, I founded it at Queens College. It didn't exist before me. I was the first person to get recruited from Flushing.
Ah, okay. So you established the chapter there in Flushing. So, this work on university campuses, it goes back to the beginning, even back during the 50s. A lot of people, when they think of the Unification Church, before any of those initial missionaries came to the United States in 1959, 1960, 61, and that was a period where university activity was actually quite prevalent, but it hardly ever gets talked about. But if you look deeply into the church archives, you find it there.
Well, you know more than I do about that early history. I was aware of 65 and later, so you know something I don't know.
CARP got officially established in Korea in 62, but it was just a renaming of something that had already been active from the mid 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, they don't recognize that. But if you study enough, and if you get your nose into enough of the nuanced material that's out there for the having, you'll find this out.
Yep. It was all, the Chinese communists were brainwashing, people, the Mao programs and Korean War. And it was the right and America and others' response to that. Like, well, they're doing it. We need to do it to counter them doing it, kind of justifying the bad behavior.
Yeah.
So Ed, thank you very much. It's so nice to meet you. I'm so glad you're out. We have a lot of digging to do and teaching to do, and I really
just touched the tip of the iceberg today.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you to give links to some of your podcasts so people who want to hear more of your detailed research about the Asian anti-communist leagues and the early days. We'll put that out. We'll have to do it again.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Take care.
All righty.